We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all mankind.
My piece of advice would be find the right program for you. Find a coach who has a passion for that or a teacher who has a passion for that. And then really work hard and don't pretend that you're working hard. So for Ivy Max to be 20 years old and have their 20th anniversary tells me that, like in a good marriage, they've done it the right way.
那耶鲁大学招生办主任曾经说过这么一句话，他说：“我们每年在干嘛？组织新生群的时候，我们是在做什么？”他说：“我们就是找今年所有这些申请的年轻人里面，当然成绩好、活动很活跃等等其他这些以外，最重要的一点是什么？他说是关注一些比他们自己要大的一些事儿的这样的年轻人。”
IMAX 是创建于2004年，我们看到华人的补教行业了，多半是注重考试，并不强调学生的素质教育。
I'm Dr. Angela Garden. I've had the pleasure of working with Ivy Max for the past 13 years as a counselor and editor, navigating my students through the college application process, helping them with their applications and then their essays, building up their extracurriculars over the years to help them get into top universities.
My name is Jackson Sutliff. I'm one of the instructors and curriculum designers for the SAT Bootcamp. I put together the readings that the students go through. I put together the quizzes that the students take. Had a hands-on part of the process from beginning to end. Keeping students engaged can be challenging, especially when we're dealing with something that's not as immediately fun. So I try to keep things light. I try to keep things engaging. The material I choose, I try to pick readings that would be interesting for the students. So it's not just all quizzes and grammar.
20年来的不断的在打造一个平台，留给我们的学生，我们就把学校的tagline Gateway to Dream College and Beyond。
飞达教育不仅是一个学习的地方，更像是一个大家庭。在这里，学生们被鼓励追求梦想，激发潜能，挑战自己。多年来，我们看到无数学生在这里成长，在学术上取得进步。
The educational system and the opportunity to move forward in education is critical. I always tell college students, the minute you finish your undergrad degree, start your graduate degree. Don't take 5 years. Don't do this, don't do that. Go from one to the other if you can. And you have to support that, so you start working. Well, there's not a lot of time left in the day to get your education.
教育目标就是真的希望能够培养出全人教育。小孩他可能不是只是读书，当然就是说他是各方面都可以做得非常的 well-rounded， 这个也是我们的教育目标。所以对于学生而言呢，每一个学生都像是种子一样，然后我们种到土里之后，开始让慢慢让它每一个小种子慢慢发芽，哪一个小种子会变成一个大树。那我觉得这个就是我们最有成就感的一个地方。
通过我们的领导力项目，改变他们的思维与习惯，这些成长的经历都是我们每一位老师最开心的事。作为教育工作者，我们始终相信，教育不仅是传授知识，更重要的是培养品德，激发好奇心和学习的热爱。飞达一直努力为学生创造一个支持他们全面发展的环境，帮助他们不仅在学业上取得成功，也在个人成长中成为更好的人。
I've also had the pleasure of going on our GPL trips to Costa Rica and Kenya. Those are definitely some of the highlights of my experiences with my students through Ivy Max.
2004年我们成立飞达之后呢，我们就一直在探讨说有没有一些办法让我们的孩子走出他自己的舒适区，了解社会，了解当今世界面临的问题，挑战有哪些。去一个下校坐那边听课，远远不如他们真正的是到一个乡村去了解民间的疾苦，把这个数额比较有限的钱能够借贷给这些需要的贫困的家庭，能够帮助他们渡过难关。读万卷书不如行万里路，行万里路不如做10000件好事儿。我们的理念不是说只是像传统的华裔补习界培养小孩的应试能力，更重要的是我们要培养他们的个人素质。
One of the things that's incredibly important for young students is to figure out what their passion is, and there is no wrong passion. It's important to identify what your purpose is and what your passion is, and once you do that, then your education needs to be pointed in that direction. Get as much education as early as you can before life starts getting in the way.
过去的20年，我觉得飞达教育做到的不仅仅是把我们的孩子下一代送到他们心中理想的名校，更多的是呢帮助他们明白自己肩上的使命，而且懂得感恩，有了责任心，找到了未来的方向。
自2019年加入飞达教育以来，已经与飞达教育共同走过了5个多年头。那在过去的这段旅途中呢，我见证了无数的学子他们在求学道路上的成长，从稚嫩走向成熟，成为一个个志存高远、脚踏实地、心怀天下的年轻人。
20 years of anything.
下一个20年，
我们一样可以用这样子的精神跟理念，
服务社区，服务他人，服务家长，
和家庭们携手并进。
未来，我们期待更多的社会精英和领袖在这里诞生。
Help students over the years prosper and get into top universities.
It's really an accomplishment.
祝福飞达，
祝福飞达。
Happy anniversary, Ivy Max.
也祝福每一位飞达的学生。
So I'm looking forward to another 20.
Ivy Max.
Ivy Max.
Ivy Max.
Ivy Max. Ivy Max.
Ivy Max.
Hello， 各位家长们好！感谢各位家长呢，能够在百忙之中抽出时间来参加我们飞达第125期的公益讲座活动。我的名字叫做 Hank。作为一名家长呢，我非常感激理解大家的心情。我们都希望暑期呢能为孩子们做出合适的规划，让他们在学业和成长中获得实实在在的提升呢。暑假呢不仅仅是休息的时间，更是孩子成长的一个关键的加油站。我们都知道，一个充实而有意义的暑期安排是能够为孩子的未来成长注入强大的动力，也会让他们在未来升学竞争中更具有优势。那下面呢，今天我们邀请到了飞达的2位资深老师为我们排疑解答。首先呢，我们的常驻嘉宾呢，尹军老师，他在飞达担任资深升学顾问9年以上的升学规划经验，成功指导了500多名的学生实现了名校的梦想。在本科申请中 CC 转 UC 方面经验丰富，擅长课外活动规划，提升学生的软实力，同时领导飞达的湖南 GPL 项目，推动弱势群体的研究和微经济的项目。接下来呢是我们的 Sebastian 老师，飞达资深的升学顾问兼文书老师，雪城大学的新闻硕士。他教授的 AP 课 ICT 写作，还有指导 AP Capstone 写作，多次学生被 MIT、斯坦福、哥大、耶鲁等顶尖大学所录取。OK， 那今天的讲座呢，将帮助我们找到这些问题的答案。飞达教育的资深顾问团队呢，将我们带来1、理解课外活动的重要性，解析如何选择规划孩子的课外活动，以便在申请中展现出独特的兴趣和能力。我们呢，也为9到11年级的学生提供详细的规划与指导。 帮助家长和学生在关键的高中阶段做出正确的选择，提升竞争力，深入探讨如何为孩子选择和申请合适的下校项目，让我们的孩子在暑期学习中更上一层楼，整合标化考试、竞赛、志愿服务和实习的有效策略，帮助学生们呢在暑期的多项活动中找到最佳的平衡点，达到全面发展的效果。那第3点呢是优质的暑期项目推荐，重点的介绍高中生的高价值暑期项目和科研机会，帮助孩子在假期中获得深度的学习和实践的机会，为未来申请加分添彩。那最后一点呢，就是暑期项目的规划时间表，我们也会提供清晰的时间线，帮助家长和学生更有条理的安排和申请各类暑期的项目，确保不遗漏任何截止日期。OK， 那在进入我们今天的会议主题之前呢，我们会为家长分享一些我们飞达在这忙碌的一个月。首先呢，我们在这个月呢举办了 Ivy Max 20周年系列讲座活动的首场活动 STEM 的主题讲座。这次活动呢，特别为家长和学生准备围绕了 STEM 课程的规划、下校选择、竞赛准备和大学的申请策略，分享了很多实用的干货，帮助家长更清晰的如何为孩子做好升学规划。下一页，谢谢。那讲座中呢，我们也邀请了成功进入名校的学长和学姐们分享自己的申请经历，从课外活动到文书写作。下一页，谢谢。带来了很多具体的建议，也是通过自己的专业经验为家长们提供了独到的见解，特别是关于名校申请的关键要求，也让大家更加安心和有了方向。下一页，谢谢。那除了分享干货之外呢，我们还为表现突出的学生颁奖，表彰他们在 FRIP 项目和社团活动中有了优异的表现。同时呢，讲座还安排了抽奖环节，也为此次活动增添了不少的乐趣和惊喜。OK， 那下一个是非常重磅的了。就在北加州刚刚结束的上周六呢，我们邀请了6位斯坦福大学优秀的本科生，与家长们分享了他们从高中成功进入斯坦福的心路历程。他们分享的内容深入且实用，涵盖了多个主题，与我们今天解锁暑期成长密码主题紧密相关。那首先第一点呢，他们总结了课外活动的选择与规划，学生们强调了活动的多样性和深度的重要性。他们提到，招生官希望看到我们的学生尖峰在某一领域展现出超凡的能力或兴趣，比如机器人研究、人工智能芯片的开发、海洋保护政策研究等。同时呢，他们建议利用暑期的机会参与科研、竞赛、公益项目，找到并展现学生的热情和特长。那第二点呢，他们又强调了申请文书的写作技巧。那我们的几位学生也分享了如何通过文书将自己的故事生动展现。他们的文书围绕着个人的经历开展，例如跨文化适应、技术与社会正义的结合，以及通过公益活动解决实际问题。文书中呢，不仅要展现学生的成就，还要通过真实的情感和思考展现个人的价值观与未来的方向。那第3点呢，他们总结的是下校和科研的选择。讲座中呢，还特别提到了暑期是想提升竞争力的黄金时间，无论是参与下校还是科研项目，都需要根据学生的兴趣和未来规划进行选择。例如，他们分享了如何通过下校接触名校资源，利用科研项目发表论文，进一步增强了申请中的学术深度。那第4点呢，是高中阶段的学术与生活的平衡。在规划高中的学术和课外活动时呢，学生们建议家长帮助孩子找到适合自己的节奏，避免过度追求全面发展而丧失了深度。他们分享在时间管理、压力应对以及兴趣培养中的实际经验，帮助我们的学生更好的准备大学生活。那最后一点呢，也是非常重要的，就是我们的学生还讲解了如何针对大学的具体要求去优化申请策略，例如通过定制化的活动列表展现学生的全面性，以及如何在面试中展现个性化的亮点和成长的潜力。OK， 那分享完斯坦福的活动呢，那我们想还有说一件比较重大的事情，就是我们飞达作为 AMC 的竞赛官方考场呢，每年都为学生提供一个专业且高质量的考试环境。今年呢，我们再次吸引了超过200名的学生在飞达各校区报名参加这国际知名的数学竞赛。我们也祝愿所有的学生都能在比赛中发挥出色，取得优异的成绩。OK， 那接下来呢，我就把今天的时间交给我们的第一位老师尹老师。
好的，谢谢汉克老师。麻烦我们看一下下一页。对，我们今天的讲座主题 是关于夏天的规划，2025年夏天的规划，下校申请有哪些项目可以推荐给各位学生和家长们。那这是每年差不多到了10月份、11月份、12月份，家长跟顾问老师还有跟学生们都比较去关心和讨论的比较多的一个话题。因为我经常也讲说，其实申请下校的整个过程，不论你是选择下校、选择去哪个学校、选择什么类型的下校，还有整个下校需要填表格，还有我们是需要跟老师要推荐信，时间的管理，还有这个下校的申请文章，以及有些下校可能会提供面试，它都是一个很好的一个小的一个模型或者是一个锻炼。对于学生们可以提前感受一下，哎，大学申请的过程其实跟下校的申请过程是有一点点相似的，是一个挺好的一个机会。并且去到下校也是给学生们可以有开阔眼界呀。比如说你去 UC 或者去哪里都是加州的学生，可能你去到 UPenn 去到哈佛或者是去到 MIT 其他的 Boston 也有很多学校来自世界各地，来自美国各个不同的州，不同程度、不同背景、不同兴趣爱好的学生，也是对于我们的孩子来讲是一个很好的一个打开眼界，去体会不一样的环境。那我们在讲今天夏令营的推荐之前呢，我们先来理解一下大方向。在大学申请的整个的这个过程中，你9年级、10年级、11年级，我们有很多家长和学生可能从5年级就开始准备了，去参加竞赛呀，去锻炼自己的一些软实力 （soft skill）。那8年级、7年级都是在为我们申请大学再去做准备。那整个申请大学里边包含哪些重要的东西？我们来可以看看今天的这个图表上，这个一个圆饼，它有显示包含你像学校的这个 GPA， 你9、10、11、12拿了什么成绩，多少门 AP， 多少个 honor， 你是一个怎么样的一个 weighted、unweighted 的 GPA， 你的学术挑战。那它还包含了 SAT Standard Test。那大学是要看你的 AP 成绩，看你的 SAT 成绩。虽然因为前几年疫情的影响，有很多学校已经把 SAT 作为一个就是 consider 的因素，我可以交也可以不交。但是我们从今年整个的这个申请环节中，又发现很多学校已经把 SAT 恢复了。我要求它又是一个你必须要有的一个提交的条件。那有很多学校也在官网上宣布了，即使我们今年不需要，但是我们可能在2026年或者是再往后的年份，我们的 SAT 是要作为一个标准化要求放在大学申请的过程中了。SAT， 那还有像我们会看大学申请的时候 ，Common App 上有很多文章，每个学校也有很多 supplemental 的文章。那 essay 和有些学校可能在一些特别的专业上是需要 interview 的，有些可能没有，但这个不是绝对。但文章和 supplemental essay 一定是所有的学校都需要的，它也占到了将近20%的比例。那还有你学校的选择 ，EAED 的选择，你的专业的选择和你学校的老师和顾问给你的 recommendation letter 推荐信，它也占到了你申请大学成功的占到了一定的比例。还有一个很大的部分就是我们右上角的紫色的部分是我们的课外活动。那它可能包含了你的实习、你的科研，还有你去做的这个社会实践活动，还有你去做的义工活动，还有你的音乐，你的有的学生是做这个体育运动的，还有包括你自己平时的一些个人兴趣爱好，还有你做的一些竞赛，所有的这些，它从你的9年级到12年级组成了你的课外活动。那我们也讲到说，在申请大学的时候，为什么我们一直在强调课外活动很重要？第一，它体现了你除了学习学术方面的一个个人背景能力，那它也是一个很好的故事，是用在你写大学申请文章里边的。所以课外活动一定是我们的家长和学生们再去规划你高中的这几年，甚至你7年级、8年级的学生要去做的提前准备很重要的一个事情，很重要的一个部分。好，我们看一下下一页。那这个图表呢是显示了我们去理解课外活动包含什么。那我刚才在前面的上一页的介绍中呢，我有讲到了有你去参加学生社团呐，或者是你做了一些 fundraise、 community 的活动、社区的活动，我去关怀了一个弱势群体，或者是我们帮一个组织去募到了基金，我们有组织了一些events，我有做了一些学生社团的 leader，我有带着一个 group 的学生给尼泊尔的学生去做线上的英文或者数学或者历史的培训，还有包括你的实习、运动，刚才这些我都讲过了哈，非常非常多，很丰富。那我们从UC 的申请表格和 Common App 的表格，如果家长们有机会的话，可以去给自己的学生或者学生自己建立一个账号，都可以看得到，在activity 的部分，它其实都有一些明确的这个分类。有几大块儿，它包含哪些内容？当然不局限于是这些活动，是各种各样的。那我们一直在跟学生和家长去强调活动的时候，就随着我们的年级越来越往上做，当然你做的事情会越来越多。那我们一定是要注意，活动不光要有质量，不光要有数量，还要有质量。质量一定是比数量更重要的。一定要注意，选择活动的时候，就像金字塔的塔尖一样，我可能7年级、8年级在做一些尝试，在发现我的兴趣领域，越往上做越往上做，慢慢找到了你的方向，找到了你未来大学申请或者未来人生职业发展要去做的这个方向，那一定是越来越像金字塔的塔尖一样，越做越细节，然后越做越含金量，往上提升。那我们看一下下一页。那理解了课外活动的重要性以后呢，我们来看一下，对于2025年的夏天，我们给9年级到11年级的学生有哪些这个暑假你该计划什么？我们给了一个 timeline， 给了一个 action plan。好的，往下一页走。先看11年级哈，迫在眉睫，必须全力以赴。对，有几个字放在这里很重要，因为11年级就是你整个高中生涯的最后一个暑假了。那过完这个暑假，大家就要开始去申请大学了。那时间是非常非常有限的，能做的事情一定是重中之重，而且要全力以赴的。可能有很多，包括像竞赛啊，很多东西都是最后一次机会了，没有额外的机会再去尝试，再去试一试这个是不是我喜欢的，我不喜欢，我明年再做。明年可能你就要进到大学了。那我们看一下11年级的学生呢，我们给你即将要去到来的这个暑假，以及暑假往前面，你应该去怎么来去做。那首先，可能刚刚11年级的学生已经过去了哈，你们应该是考了这个 PSAT 那看看自己的 PSAT 考得怎么样，下一步加上学校的 GPA， 加上所有的这些东西，你是否可以qualify 这个 National Merit Scholarship 那这个是到了12年级开学的时候，差不多你就会得到学校的一个通知，你有没有拿到这个荣誉？那 PSAT 是可能刚刚大家10月份已经考过了，可能有些应该是成绩都出来了，因为我有听到一些学生跟我反馈成绩考的是一个什么样的情况。那再往下呢，对于11年级的学生，可以开始去建立自己的 Common App 了，因为 Common App 今年有做了一个新的规定，新的一个改变，就是你即使不是12年级的学生他们也可以允许你去申请 Common App， 并且这个数据不会，它以前数据是每年会更新的，现在数据就不会更新了，它会一直留在那里。那你就可以开始把自己的活动啊、自己的信息啊，可以往上去填，然后明年申请的时候，你可以再去更新、再去完善。那下一个呢是关于 Standard Test， 刚才我们讲到了，那明年的5月大家要去考 AP 考试，那明年的暑假是你最后一个假期。有机会再去尝试你的 SAT、你的 ACT， 那明年大概就是有这个6月份有一次，因为大部分5月份要考 AP 考试，大家不一定有时间去参加 SAT 在5月份的考试，或者是6月份 ACT 这样子。那最好的一个准备的机会可能是在明年的暑假，那大家看是不是要留一些时间，对于 SAT 还没有考出来的学生，你要不要去做 SAT 和 ACT？明年的这个7、8月份的时候。最好不要等到什么9月份、10月份，我已经开始去做申请大学了，我才刚再去考我的 SAT 和 ACT， 一定要往前去规划。再下一步呢，是不是要选择继续去上一些 Honor 啊，或者是 AP Class？那你仍然有机会，像明年的1月份。 开始，Ivy Max 还是有提供有几门它只是一个 semester 的课程，像 AP Econ 啊，AP AP Micro 和 AP Macro、AP Physics C、AP Physics C E&M 这些仍然对于我们目前11年级的学生来讲，你们还是可以去注册去上课的。那full year 的课程可能要等到明年暑假了，可以仍然考虑看看自己在申请大学之前有没有机会再去选择一些比较挑战的课程。那现在开始，下一步去规划你的final 你的 summer 的计划。那再下一个呢，就是最后一次应该是 AMC 已经考完了，10跟12都考完了，今年是没有机会再去考了。但是12，和考的如果你12考的不错的话，你 qualify Amy， 那你接下来要去准备你的 Amy 的考试，以及包括接下来还有像有 Sabo 有 Saco。还有像一些 writing 或者是艺术类的竞赛，仍然有机会去参加，像 F=MA 啊、物理这些，仍然要去继续做准备。那下一步呢是 summer program，summer program 这些列了一些哈，但一会儿我后面会做具体的这个细节上的一个介绍，我们就不在这里一个一个去讲了。那再往下呢，看看有没有机会在明年的暑假，或者是明年可以提前早一点开始去做一些 research 或者是 independent research 的 project。那这个也是对于一些比较资优，或者是已经 take 过像 AP Seminar、AP Research， 或者你自己以前是有一些 research 经验的学生，可以着重把它放在明年的。也就是我们11年级的下半个学期和明年的 summer 把它完成。那再往下做，还仍然有机会去做一些 leadership 呀，或者是一些 volunteer 的 work， 像Ivy Max 的 P2P， 还有像去到湖南生物多样化这类型的活动，仍然在今年的冬天也许还有一些机会哈。今年冬天可以问一问我们的老师们，看还有没有名额。但明年的暑假，是可以放到你们的计划上。把 summer camp、summer activity、volunteer work 和你的考试和你的 AP 课，把它去分开。我哪几个礼拜应该去做什么样的事情？那再往下一步呢？对于11年级，虽然不是申请 summer，虽然不是跟 summer camp 相关，但是你要开始跟你学校的 counselor 和你的老师保持一个好的关系，因为他们是明年。要帮你写大学推荐信的，那也许可能你12月份就会和这个老师有一些联系，他可能会帮你去写。明年你可能2月份申请一个 summer camp，1月份申请一个 summer camp 也需要推荐信，那仍然要跟你学校的这几位老师保持好一个良好的关系，让他们来帮你去撰写你 summer camp 和明年申请大学的推荐信。那再往下一步呢，是利用好明年暑假的时间。要去做什么？有申请 art 或者是相关专业的学生，你要去准备完成你的 portfolio 最后的时间了，并且有一些 art 专业，它可能截止日期比正常的 EAED 还要早，不是11月1号，它可能在10月15号，或者是在10月1号，所以 art portfolio 是要在明年的 summer 一定要把它完成出来。对于可能不是申请这部分专业的学生呢？有一些可能是你的个人爱好，是你的个人的兴趣，你可能不会做一个专业，就是非常专业的一个 portfolio， 可能是一个你的兴趣集，去展现给大学你的多样化。哎，我是一个德智体美劳我都发展的学生，那你也可以去准备你的 portfolio， 去呈现给大学，我是一个多样化的学生，也是有必要的。那再下一步呢，就是开始在明年的暑假，可能也要拿一些时间出来去准备你的 early action 和 early decision 大学申请的 EAED， 我们叫这个早申早录所以对于11年级的学生来看的话，不光光说这些活动是要放到明年暑假了，那甚至可能你明年的这个1月份就要开始坐下来列一个 timeline。我什么时间点我要去做什么事情？这些时间它不是说一个固定的截止日期放在那里，我到了这个截止日期，我做完了就完事儿了。好多时间其实上是随着你12月份、1月份、3月份，一直到明年的12月份都要去持续去进行的。所以管理好时间很重要，全力以赴。好，那我们看一下，如果是现在10年级的学生，他的这个 summer plan， 我们应该是怎么来建议的？好，看一下下一页。 好，那10年级的学生跟11年级的学生会有一些比较类似的东西，那我就挑不一样的去着重的给各位家长和学生去讲一下。那重复的东西呢，我们大概稍微带一下啊。那10年级的学生，明年是你们第一次要去开始考 PSAT 了啊。那学校会组织你们去考 PSAT，那包括可能学生们之前9年级到10年级的过渡还没有开始去考虑 SAT 和 ACT，那明年的暑假不妨是一个的时间，可以去做一些 academic 方面的一些像 bootcamp 呀、SAT bootcamp 呀，提升一下自己的英文、数学能力，去准备好我进入到11年级，我可能陆陆续续要去考这个10年级，我要去考 PSAT 和 SAT 了。那再往下做呢，也是一样的。刚才我讲过了 ，Common App、Collation 都可以去建立账户，去 build up 你的resume 也好，你的 profile 也好，这个都是一样的。那对于10年级的学生，还有机会，还有时间去就是继续去深造一下你的这个 critical thinking 和 critical writing skill。为什么 ？Summer Camp Essay。还有 college essay、UC 的 essay， 所有的 essay， 大家可以看得出来，它不是一个 research essay， 它是一个 creative， 它是一个创意写作的东西。所以学生们具备创意思维、创意写作这方面的能力，是不光为了你以后的人生啦，短期的目标，为了你的 summer， 为了你的这个 summer essay， 为了你的 college essay 都很重要。那你仍然有时间可以，比如说多做阅读啊，或者是针对性这样子的课程可以去选择一些。另外呢，再往下就是有一个你的这个很强的。或者是一个很 smart 的一个你的学术方面和你课外活动方面，你要去做一个平衡。可能9年级我的课外活动少一点，但是我进入到10年级，我的 academic 和我的课外活动我都要 balance 一些。那你有这样子的一个计划，也是比较好去协助学生去完成和做好这一部分。那刚才讲过了，challenge class、honor 和 AP 课，那进入到10年级、11年级，你的选课要不要上一些额外的课程都是很重要的。AP 考试仍然要进行，并且要给自己定一个目标，我要有一个好的分数，5分、4分、3分，还是我最后就是随便考1分、2分的，这个可能对于申请大学是用不上的，所以要给自己设定目标是很重要的。那再往下一步Summer Camp， 我们一会儿后面来讲，对于9年级、10年级的学生有哪些针对性可以去申请的。那 AMC 竞赛或者是其他方面的竞赛，那你今年参加完，那你可能试了水了，那有成绩当然是最好的。那如果没成绩呢，你11年级还可以再试1年，所以我们比11年级的学生多了一次机会，但是机会其实也就只有这2次。非常非常非常的少，一定要珍惜今年自己，不论是你 qualify Amy 往下去做明年的准备我要进到有 JMO 有 SUMO 我还是要去考数学、物理各式各样类型的竞赛。我们还是有2次机会，为数不多，只有2次机会了。我们知道竞赛一般就是1年1次。那再往下做呢，会有一些 summer camp 是针对10年级的学生可以开始申请的。我们知道好多 summer camp 可能只是for rising senior only 那有一些是10年级的学生也可以开始去申请的，我们稍后来去做介绍。那再往下看的话，不太一样的地方是还有我们可以开始给你的 college plan 去做一个计划。那你也可以去看一看像什么 college tour 利用 summer 的时间去各个校园去走访走访，看看我是不是以后对于清晰的大学申请或者是专业申请有一个目标，朝着这个目标我去做计划，去做努力，那它实现起来可能会更事半功倍一点。那再往下做，开始要和你的这个 counselor 去 build up 你们的 relationship， 这个也是非常重要的。不要以为10年级我就不需要跟我的学校的老师保持一个好的关系，因为我可能不会跟他要推荐信，我等我11年级的老师，不一定的。我们有的时候会遇到一个特别的情况，就是我11年级的老师可能满了，没有给我写。或者是我11年级我在这门课上我没有拿到好的成绩，或者是这个课的老师不是我要申请的那个专业的老师， 你也许还有一种可能就是我10年级的老师和11年级是同一位，都有可能发生这样子的情况，所以也要有意识的开始跟你的老师保持一个好的关系。那还有一个是对于做 research 有兴趣的学生 capstone 的 program， 那 AP seminar AP research 是不是要开始早点去考虑了？因为这是一个2年的项目，它是需要提前2年去计划的。那对于想要去做科研方面看一下9年级的学生。那我们刚才讲完到10年级跟11年级以后，我们再进入到9年级，大家会看到其实有好多9年级在做的事情是为了10年级跟11年级去做一个比较好的一个基础那我们所以在9年级或者是8年级的时候会更注重学生你的 soft skill， 你的problem solving 的能力，还有你的 time management 的能力。是非常重要，在这个时间段，家长要有意识的去培养学生和引导学生这一方面的基础。那我们也在这边给家长们有列到了几个点，培养他的这方面的能力是点点滴滴的，这些能力绝对不是一时促成的，或者是通过你可能会看到他通过某一个事情成长了、长大了，但是这些能力绝对是平时点点滴滴累积出来的。还有9年级的学生呢，可以去开始累积你的词汇你的 grammar， 因为我们知道在学校老师是不教 grammar 的这个地方写错了一个单词，应该是 reading，我拼错了还有你的 writing 都可以去开始去做累积。账户我不讲了，刚才已经讲过了。那再往下呢，包括这些考试 AMC 10，那9年级的学生今年、明年和后年都可以去做。那再往下做，也是这个 critical thinking 和你的这个writing skill。那我这边有重复一个 reading list 呀，或者是这些对他们来讲很重要，但一定是非小说类型的阅读你可以看看你的 SAT 将来去考试的时候，它的 reading 一定都是逻辑性阅读，所以小说类的阅读是没有什么提升的。小说类的阅读一般就是受众群体比较广，怎么简单，怎么好玩，怎么来。那非小说类的才刚是对于我们的学生去提升你的思维逻辑能力会比较好的一个选择。所以家长在选择这个书本阅读的时候，一定要注意这个选择。那你们如果需要 reading list， 可以跟 Ivy Max 的老师去要一份。我们是有一份reading list 是经过设计的，比较适合我们的学生去阅读的书，可以买来给他读，或者是去图书馆借来给他读。那下一步呢？Summer Plan， 我们一会儿往后面去做。那刚才已经重复过了，肯定是有一个要在每一个暑假要去做一些事情，或者是我去考虑在学术方面提升，还是要在课外的这个 soft skill 方面去提升。在9年级的时候是可以有一些选择性的。竞争性的 camp， 我们一会儿来讲，有一些 camp 是适合9年级的，比如说像。有一些 camp 是9年级的学生能申请，过了9年级你反而还申请不了了，那这个也是要去注意的。再往下，一些社区活动leadership 呀，要去开始有意识的通过这些活动去培养他们。包括我们还会想给我们的学生可以有一个这个 roadmap。一些可能性的活动，可以跟你的 counselor 去商量看看，我们去试一试，也许这条路走不通，我们可以去做另一条路。9年级我们仍然还是可以有一些试错机会在里边的，那我们所以讲到说未雨绸缪，有备无患，这是很重要的，因为我经常讲到有的家长会跟我说，9年级尹老师是不是有点早？我说真的不早了。要开始去做计划了。我们最简单 ACT 我想考，我错过了今年明年11年级，我不一定1年就可以把它考上去。那你提前没有去学习相关的课程，没有做过竞赛的培训，也不是你一上去就可以拿到 Amy 或者是 qualify 更好的成绩的。所以未雨绸缪，有备无患，这个是我们今天去讲这几个 plan，最重要的想要传达给家长和学生们的一个信息。好，我们看一下下一页。我不太确定今天在这边7年级和8年级的学生家长多不多，但是呢，也是一个建议，及早开始赢在起跑线上。像上周和上上周我们组织的 AMC 10跟12的考试。从那个报名表格上后台报名，我就可以看到有很多5、6年级的学生就已经来考 AMC 10了。非常多不是1、2个，不是3、4个，我甚至可以看到有的中心去到那边可能有30%甚至更多的学生5、6、7、8年级的都有我看到最小的是5年级的，我暂时还没有看到更小的。我当时还在感叹，我说5年级就来尝试 AMC 10了。当然他妈妈可能给他把 AMC 10和 AMC 8都给他报名了，看看第一是试一试，还有就是我到底能出一个什么样的成绩。所以我们很多家长真的是提前开始的非常早。那7年级、8年级的学生呢，也是跟9年级的学生，我们的建议是有一些类似的，循序渐进的去培养他们你的各方面的能力。那这边也多加了一些建议，就是阅读，这个真的很重要。我们一直在提他的阅读和写作绝对不是一天促成的写 journal， 像我们去到湖南，我有带湖南的项目我的学生都知道，我们去带湖南项目的时候呢，一直都有给他们天天晚上都要写 journal， 要把今天的事情写出来，一定要有个人反思在里边，也要有个人反馈在里边，非常的就是重要。那再往下做呢，我们有一些适合现在7、8年级或者是更小的学生的一些竞赛，也可以考虑看看，像 History B History Bowl 这些都可以试试。我要不要 Summer 去准备一下，然后我可以去参加，他们 Summer 和平时其实都有的。那另外的一些建议就是像可以 finish Algebra 1 Geometry 在你进入到9年级之前要去准备完这些东西。那再往下一些 summer camp 我等一会儿来介绍那另外的一些就是我们也是给了一些建议在这边，那大家可以截个图看看，到时候跟你的 counselor还有你的孩子一起去商量看看，我如果是比较 advanced 的学生，今年要不要开始一些 standard academic 的方面的培训，或者是我明年的暑假我就来做一些课外活动，大开眼界的一些东西。这个是我们对于学生来讲是给大家的一些去规划明年暑假的建议。好，我们看一下下边。好，下一页。好，下一页开始呢，我们会列了一些就是 summer camp 在这边，我快速的可以给大家来过一下，大家也可以截个图。其实我已经把 OK， 我们保持在下一页就好我们把 summer camp 分了几个类型，像有这个想做STEM 方面的不论你是 engineer、computer science 还是其他方面，我们有列了一些 camp 在这边。另外呢，还有一些是艺术的或者是 business humanity 的，那我们都列了一些典型的在这边。那如果有兴趣的话，可以 make 这个记录下来，可以看看适不适合你申请，符不符合你的一些学术要求，以及时间上能不能匹配。我有把像 WASP 这个 Young Scholar 是 UC Davis 举办的一个跟 bio 更相关的农业呀 bio 环境更相关的，很适合11年级的学生去申请。申请大部分我列在这边的应该是都已经开始了，包括像价钱我能在网上查到的信息，我们看到去年6500，今年7500，一年涨了1000，也是每年的这个各个学校的夏令营也是水涨船高，费用一直在涨，并且这个费用应该是不包含像什么你去到学校的，比如说这个路程的费用它应该是不包含的那这个是bio 相关、农业相关的，每年应该是只招40个学生非常非常非常竞争的一些项目。像还有一个大家知道的是那个 Summer Science Program， 它是有 Caltech 和 MIT、Harvard 都有去推荐过的，并且应该也是有去协办的，但是进入到这些 camp， 大家不要有一个误区，就并不代表说我被这些 camp 录取了，我一定进 MIT 是就会有成功，它会有一些帮助，有一些参考因素在里边，但它绝对不是一个决定性的一个 key， 我一定可以进到 MIT Caltech。 但它一定是非常非常挑战的项目，每年的录取学生可能真是个位数，就是个位数的那种，不比你被哈佛、斯坦福录取容易。那它有几个领域，包括在几个大学去举办，我有都列在了这边，大家可以稍后去参考参考，到它的官网上去看一看，包括截止日期啊，对于国内和国外的学生的申请的截止日期，它都会不太一样。那这边还有一个 summer camp， 我专门拿了几个就是比较典型的是 research 方面的来做推荐哈，还有一个是CEE 举办的。CEE 就是去办那个有 SABO 啊、竞赛啊这样的一个教育中心，它是跟 MIT 一起举办的 Research Science Institute RSI， 我们很多人应该听说过，很多学生每年也都挤破了头去申请，是 Science 和 Engineer 方面的，那也可以去录取应该也是个位数，好，明年大概它有一些 camp 是有一些特色的，有一些 camp 是有免费，或者是对于低收入户也是有可以去申请 financial aid 的，跟大学申请是一样的。具体它的信息可能去官网上去看一下，是不是financial aid 可以有帮助。下一页。好。下一页的这3个 camp 呢，其实上他们在录取率上面，不太一样，像第一个项目是在这个 Stony Brook 的Garcia Summer Scholar Program，它是应该是不太需要花，应该是有一个教育基金在支持。7周材料学可以去考虑看，它有很严格的要求，我也列在这边了，这样 Rising Senior Only 或者是 Freshman College Student GPA 3.8，但是大家一定要看，肯定是比3.8更高的竞争的学生非常非常多，他可能 weighted GPA 之后可能4.2、4.3都有他有列了这些条件，你不具备这些条件是不可以的像他要求你有 English、Chemistry、Math、Physics、Biology， 他要让你大于3门，并且是 Honor 或者是 AP level 的。课外活动他会考虑。那作为一个参考因素，比如说你去年参加了什么 summer camp 你分享给他，他可能一看他参加过什么什么 camp， 有一些相关的经验，我更愿意录取你有经验的学生他还要考量有你的 SAT 要大于60%的 percentile， 那你没有 SAT， 我都要去申请这个 summer camp 了，我的这个暑假我都没我去年我都没考 SAT， 那肯定没有戏了还有像推荐信。刚才我讲了，10年级就要开始和你的老师去build up 这个关系，我们是要推荐信。那再往下看呢，这个是 female only 一个WTP Women Technology Program， 也是 MIT 举办的。那它也是对于那个 mechanical engineer， 它以前是有 double E 的，但是我昨天看了一下，那个 double E 在今年的 summer 2025是明年的 summer 2025它是不举办了，但是对于 mechanical engineer 的学生，女孩子可以去申请这个项目，录取率也是个位数就是个位百分比，去年是320个人申请，他们只录了20个。就20个，以前 Double E 是有40个名额，但是它不举办了，它也没有了，不知道以后会不会有。以前是有 Double E 40个，那个Mechanical 20个，所以它是这个有一个竞争性非常强那再下来呢 ，Cosmos 是。大家肯定很多人都知道了 ，Cosmos 是我们每年很多加州的学生都会去申请的UCLA，我不知道前年 UCLA 有没有，但是最新的是 UCLA 也有来加入到 Cosmos 的这个 campus 里头。以前是 UCI、UCSD、UCD、UC Santa Cruz， 每一个它的 campus 都会有非常非常多的选择，让我们的学生去可以看看，根据自己的不同兴趣领域，主要是 Math、Science 和 Engineer 方面的那费用也不低，也是5000多包括一个44的一个申请费。具体大家可以参考看看。我是觉得这个项目还蛮适合9年级、10年级的学生申请，但是往年的录取经验出来，确实是10跟11，被录取的人会比较多，尤其是11年级的学生，他各方面学术方面也好，或者是他的这个个人的这个 这个 EQ、IQ 方面都更成熟，所以录的人相对于这个年级会比较多一点。已经开放申请了，那如果想要去试一试的学生，可以抓紧时间开始写你的这个 essay， 去做 Cosmos 的一个或者是其他项目的一些申请。那刚才看了这6个项目，可能大家已经总结出来一个点，就是它有很多潜在条件在那边。比如说我要求我的 GPA 到多少啊？比如说你要求你有一些课程，比如说要求你有 SAT， 比如说要求你有一些就是前面的一些活动来做铺垫。那为什么我们要从9年级、10年级开始去做准备，开始去做规划？你到了11年级要去申请这些 camp 了，你才发现哦，原来这些东西我都还没有开始准备，那时间一定是不够去做的。所以为什么我们强调9年级跟10年级就一定要帮他们做好规划、做好计划，去为将来11年级的这些比较有竞争性的 summer camp 去做准备。好，后面几页呢，我应该是有列了，下一页。那后边几页呢，我有列了一些不同种类、不同分类的，比如说像Stanford 的 Medical 我们之前也有学生去的，在那边去做实习、去做 research 还有一些 bio 方面的，像这个 Michigan State 也有，还有像 Jackson Lab 这些，我们有列了一些在这边，大家不妨可以截个图。我可能今天时间是有限的，并且它并不适合所有的学生。具体说 ，OK， 这个 camp 我要不要去，我要不要申请，请一定要去查完这些先决条件以后，时间匹配以后，然后呢，看看哎适不适合你去做一个申请，可以和你的 counselor 去商量一下。像下面这个是这个也是 Stanford 举办的一个关于地质这方面环境方面的一个 summer camp。目前2025的 information 还没有，我们再看看它之后会不会有更新的信息去年是有的。下一页。好，Science 和 Engineer 呢，我也列了一些在这边，像大家熟知的 Clark Scholar， 还有 UPenn 的 M&TSI， 挺好的一个消息，就是我昨天在 M&TSI 的官网上，我去搜最新的信息嘛，我想看看明年是多少钱呀，还是怎么之类的。我看到了之前 Ivy Max 的一个学生在上面，他现在应该是在 Stanford。我说，哎，看到一个很熟悉的笑脸在那边，我知道他那年是有去到 M&TSI， 特别亲切。像之前 YYGS 的首页上也是 Ivy Max 的一个学生的照片放在那边，就是有好几个学生可能在项目的期间表现是比较优秀的，表现比较突出的，被选择上来放到了首页上。昨天我就看到了当时的这位学生的照片，他已经毕业了哈，已经毕业了，对，现在也是在Top 5的学校，Rice 在 BU 的，像这个UC Santa Barbara 还有 UCSB 这些，我就是列了一下给大家。我们再往下一页看一下，大家可以截个图。细节上基本上它每一个项目都提供很多不同的领域、不同的方向。我们还是要去到官网上看看。这些方向适不适合，像 Awesome Math、Ross Math 这些都是可以对于数学感兴趣的学生，并且你想准备有 SUMO 有 GMO， 可以考虑看看暑假可以去 Awesome Math 去试一试，它有 online 的，也有in person 的。像 Stanford AI for All 9年级 only， 过了9年级就不能申请了。条件也很苛刻，2周，女生 only，9年级 only。它主要的目的就是给我们喜欢这个理工科 AI 方面的女孩子提供机会，你可以在那边去跟相关领域的教授或者是博士生一起去做一些这方面的应用学习 research。在下面应该是 CMU 的一个关于计算机方面的一个。Summer Camp， 那对于喜欢的学生，我喜欢打游戏，我想研究游戏背后是一些 game design game programming 的东西，也是一个很好的尝试。再往下一页。我们今天是列了很多 camp 在这边，我很快的讲一下，因为我觉得 camp 的选择 市面上的 camp 你可以搜出上万个来，甚至更多，五花八门，什么样的都有啊。如何去，包括它的 marketing 也做得很好，它的宣传也做得很好。对于我们的家长真的是很难去选择哪一个 camp 是有含金量的，哪一个 camp 是没有的。一样的，我们的就是 Ivy Max 的 counselor 会给你做一个推荐，给你 make 一个 summer list。那这边呢是 business 和 humanity 的，像 UPenn 的 LBW 啊，喜欢 business 的学生，它里边有像这个 finance、marketing 管理、经济方面的也是有要求，11年级的学生才可以申请，就是往上升的学生才可以申请。YYGS 耶鲁的举办的一个这个也是 humanity 方面的，有这个 political science econ 这个 problem solving、global challenge 这方面。像 NSLC 它也是一个这样子的一个机构。它是一个组织，不是一个机构，在各个学校，在各个很多地方它都有合作，然后有他们的 campus，各种各样的领域9年级和这个它好多个不同年龄段的学生都可以去申请像下一个JNSLC Junior National Junior National Student Leadership Conference， 它就是给小年级的学生申请的，天数更短但是它目前只有 American U 和 UC Berkeley 有分别就只有6天。你可以去试试看 ，middle school student 的就可以去考虑。好，下一页。这边也是我列了一些我觉得还不错，之前我们的学生有去到的，给回来的反馈都是觉得还不错，我们可以去锻炼锻炼的一些 summer camp， 但是它的申请难度都是有的。我今天列在这边的都是属于含金量和申请难度都有的虽然有的可能是免费的，有的可能要7、8千，有的要8、9千，不便宜，但这些都是还是值得大家去和我们的学生坐下来，和你的 counselor 坐下来去做一些 research 工作，去研究一下的。大家可以截个图在这边，就是我们今天就不一个一个去过了，先给大家做一些推荐。好，下一页。这个呢是一些写错了一个单词，应该是 life experience，包括 art 呀这方面的一些推荐，像 Brown Leadership Institute、Summer at NYU、Summer at UPenn、Summer at Brown。但大部分这样类型的都是对于9年级和12年级的学生都可以申请。它会有一定，就是有一些住校的，它会有一定年龄的限制。可能不住校的 online 的这一种呢，它年龄可以稍微放的宽松一点，但一定是有这样子的要求的。好多课程都是包含了大学的学分 credit， 那这个一定要和你的 counselor 去商量一下，我到底是暑假花时间去大学修一些大学 credit 的课程。还是说我要去 boost 我高中期间的 GPA， 我去花时间去上一些 AP 课程，在我的 summer。毕竟你 AP 课程上完以后，你还可以去参加 AP 考试，还可以去在高中申请大学的时候提升你的这个high school 的 GPA， 是不一样的。它的针对不一样情况的学生，有的学生是需要提高你的 high school 的 GPA 的，有的学生他 high school 的 GPA 已经很好了。那我不妨可以花时间去这样好的学校去，打开眼界尝试一下不同的领域、不同的 area， 这个一定是要去综合考量一下的，不要一边倒的说，我一定 summer 就要去上一个 Brown 的 credit 的课程，然后将来就可以提高我对 Brown 的申请率。No， 不是这样子的不会因为你去上了一个课，上了2个课，我拿了2个 A 在那边，更何况万一你拿不到 A 呢？这个也是有一定几率在里边的哈，也许拿得到，也许万一我没拿到，课程可能是大学 pre-college 的课程，有点难度，我没拿到，还留了一个不好的记录在那边，所以这个还是不要一边倒的去说，我一定去大学上这些课，有学分就是一个能力的证明，其实它不一定的，一定要看自己的实际情况是怎么样子的。好，下一页。好，下一页，这是一个 timeline，因为我们今天的讲座的一个主题就是还要去给大家和我们的学生去讲一下，这个 essay，summer essay 怎么去写 那我们也是给了一点建议，包括这个 timeline， 我应该什么样的月份我开始去比如说 finalize 我的 program list 呀，然后我们2月份到3月份明年的时候，截止日期陆陆续续在那边，我要开始去提交。再往下做呢，我们可能还要等到3月份我交完了以后，我要有一个 backup plan， 万一这些 summer camp 都那么竞争，他没有录取我怎么办？那你申请大学也是一样的那4月份和5月份，包括6月份，我们有写了一些建议在这边，怎么样去，如果你真的要去这些 summer camp 啦，一些你的旅途啊、旅行啊、机票啊、housing 啊，这些全部都是要考虑的事情。那我们给了一个建议 tips timeline 在这边，大家也可以截个图去参考，可以和自己的 counselor 坐下来一起去讨论看看。那接下来呢，我就会邀请 Ivy Max 的资深的 editor Sebastian 老师来重点去讲一下后边我们申请的环节中过程中你的 essay 呀各方面。因为 Sebastian 老师今年他会讲英文，所以如果现在前面是家长的话，请你们可以带你们的小孩过来，因为前面我讲的这些是一个策略方面的选择。可能还是需要家长和 counselor involve 进来的比较多一点。毕竟学生他自己的经验、人生阅历，他可能去选择这些是有一定困难的，还是需要家长和 counselor 给一些指引。但后面 essay 的部分只能他自己写，你帮他写不了的。所以我很建议，如果说你们现在在家，然后家长有这个小孩在旁边。把他拉过来一起听 Sebastian 老师的关于 summer essay 啊这方面的一些建议。Okay. Hi, Sebastian. I finished my part, the list and the action. So now I ask the parents, they can invent their case. The students come with them to get the summer essay and your part. Okay.
Okay. So should I wait a minute for them to come?
No. Yeah, you can continue and the stage is for you. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a lot of material to cover. I have a lot of things to say, and I'll try to keep it as interesting as I can and try to keep it as personal as I can. And that's the first thing that I want you to think about as you're figuring out how to write these essays, is that everything you write has to be personal, right? We're past the point of no return when it comes to ChatGPT. And so this is true for the summer program applications and even later on for your college applications. Is that one of the first things, like a priority that you should have in your mind, is that you have to prove that you aren't ChatGPT, that the words you're writing really are yours. Now, can you use ChatGPT for brainstorming and things like that? Yeah, sure. Doing research? Yeah, fine. But if you use ChatGPT or any of the AI writing tools to write the actual words, it's not going to work out for you in the long run. Okay. And so everything has to be about you, and it has to be a story, your story that stands out compared to the hundreds or thousands of other kids who are applying to the program that you're applying to. Now, to do that requires a change in mindset, okay? The first change in mindset is that everything that you've ever done when it comes to like your classrooms and your academic work is reactive, right? Your teachers give you an assignment and you follow the directions of the assignment, and they have to grade your assignment according to a rubric, and they care about you, and they, give you generally good grades because they are invested in your future. They already have a relationship with you. Whether you think that they like you or not is relevant. I promise you that your teachers do actually care, and they feel, that sort of like, if you want to think of it like a bias, right? They owe you something. And so that relationship and all the work that you do, it's reacting. But when it comes to these summer programs, and for most of you, if this is your first time doing like applications like this, then it's the first time that you've ever had to be proactive, not reactive. And so think of it like this. Imagine that you're the admissions officers of these programs, and you have to read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these essays, hour after hour after hour. And a huge majority of the kids are like good kids, and they, are qualified, and they have things to say, and they could probably deserve to be into the program. But deserving the program has nothing to do with it. This is about you proving who you are and forcing the admissions officers to care about you, because they don't know anything about you. They don't owe you anything. All they know is the transcripts that you submit, the resume, the activities, and then the essays that you write, the words that you put on the page. That's all they have, right? And so you have to get into that mindset of being proactive. If they read 3 sentences and it's kind of boring and they have nothing really there to care about, then that's going to hurt you. You know, they're going to finish reading the essay because they have to, but they've already kind of checked out because they have hundreds more to read. And so they're not going to invest any kind of like emotional connection unless you make them feel that emotional connection. So get into a proactive mindset where you force them to care about you. And then the thing that you get them to care about is this person that you are. And so you have to think about yourself like a product that we're selling. This whole application process, it's really just one big advertising campaign. And you're the product, we're selling the product, we're trying to get those programs to buy you, right? So you have to figure out, well, what is your brand? What do you look like on paper to them? And that comes down to, I mean, it's a lot of different pieces, but in general, you have like your core, and your core usually has 2 parts. One part is the academic thing. So, you know, what your future major is going to be, basically, right? And then the other half of your core, like it's like a solar system model. You have a planet and then you have moons orbiting around the planet, basically. So that core planet is your academics plus one other thing. For some of you, it's like a sport or some art or music, or you started a nonprofit or some kind of project that you're working on, something like that, right? And then around that core planet, you have your hobbies, your interests, maybe some other subjects in school that you like that would be like a second major potentially or something like that, right? So you have to understand what your brand is. And it doesn't mean that it has to be like perfectly quantified by the time that you start the essays, but you do have to think about it. And you should be thinking about it with every sentence that you write of, what is my selling point? What makes me someone that they'd be interested in more than the hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of other kids who are trying to get into that program? And you don't have to like put your like, you know, excessive pressure on yourself that to be, you know, 1 in a million and unique, right? We're going to talk about the word unique later. You don't have to be some kind of, you know, rock star to get into these programs. You just have to show them who you actually are. They want to like you. So give them things to like about you. Figure out what are your strengths, what are the key pieces that make up your brand, and then present that brand. So when it comes to the brand, one of the big sort of like philosophical questions that we always face, whether it's for the summer programs or for college applications, is, do you want to be well-rounded or do you want to be specialized? And there's different schools of thought, different counselors, different companies, different schools will tell you different things, right? I'm of the opinion that the era of the well-rounded is on its way out, or it already is on the way out. You know, the students that I have that have the most success right now, it's the ones who have specialized. You know, they have depth as opposed to variety. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't want variety, right? And when we start to look at some of the prompts that you're going to face and kind of like how to think about them, you definitely need to present other parts of yourself beyond just, I'm really good at math or whatever the thing is, right? So it's really more like, instead of a, you know, have it as verses, but it's not like a contrarian thing. It's figure out the right moments and the right questions where you show your depth, and then find other ways to show that variety. Because you are going to have questions where they just ask you about like a certain hobby or, you know, a time when someone disagreed with you or something like that. So you do need both. And that's all part of you figuring out your brand. What are your specialties? What are your strengths? And then what are other ways that you can show some of this well-roundedness? And then the last bullet on this slide I want to talk about is to show a vision for your future. Now, this one can be very overwhelming, and I completely understand it. You know, there's all this pressure. Most people, most teenagers are under all this pressure to like or at least you think you're under all this pressure to have your whole life planned out. And I know what I'm going to major. I'm going to go to this college. I'm going to do this job, right? And that's cool. If you really are like clear like that, great, show them that. But if you aren't, it's completely fine. You are not expected to know exactly what you're going to do for the rest of your life, but you are expected to show that you have some ideas, that you think about it. And so, one of the things I always tell my students is don't get locked into this mentality that that you're making promises, that you say something in an essay and then that's what you're supposed to do for the rest of your life. You don't have to think that way. They're not going to check in 3 years and get mad at you because you changed majors, right? So as long as it's realistic and it's true to who you are, then that's what they care about. Ultimately, that's what they want. They want kids who care about things. And I know that sounds very simplistic, and it is simplistic, but it's also true. Figure out the things you care about, and then look at those prompts and make a list of all the ways that you can show what you care about that answer the prompt that you're dealing with. Okay. So 3 sort of approaches for doing that. The essays that you write, they have to be strategic, organic, and dynamic. Okay. Strategic means, coming back to that brand thing, how do these stories fit into the resume and the list of activities that you're presenting in your application, and even also your transcript, the classes you've taken and stuff, other programs you've done before, right? We want to know when to show off some pieces, when to reserve some of them and use them for other prompts, and mix and match and figure out the right balance of presenting all of the strengths that you have. And so it's a planning and thoughtfulness thing, which means time, right? So, the reason we're having this webinar now is because it's getting to be that time of year, and your winter break, just put it in your head. Winter break, this is what you're doing. You're going to have a list of, 8, 10, 12 programs. You start to do your research, you figure out, which ones are better than the others. You narrow it down to 5 or 6, something like that. And then you start to write those essays. And it's all about time and planning, being strategic with your strengths and fitting them into the programs and the prompts that you have to write essays about. Now, when I say organic, what I'm talking about is that the stories really do have to be natural. The huge majority of the writing that you do, most of you, unless you're like a advanced creative writer or something, the huge majority of your writing is academic. Your history classes, your English classes, you're following rubrics and templates, and you have a very specific style of writing, and that's necessary for your classwork. But for these essays, that's the opposite of what we want. The way that you write, the topics that you choose, it should be natural. It should be just you as a person, and the ideas are flowing into one and the other, and we're showing that normal human side of you. Okay. Outside of your GPA, outside of that transcript, outside of the resume, who are you as a person? It should feel like a conversation. 5 years ago, the academic writing style for these applications, it succeeded. It worked, right? The contest of who has the best vocabulary and who can structure a 3-paragraph essay the best, that used to work. But now with ChatGPT, that's completely irrelevant. You do that, you're just going to sound like everyone else. So these essays should feel like the admissions officer is just talking to you. Now, that doesn't mean be casual, right? We do still want to have a very careful and specific tone, but it should be a natural, organic tone. And then the last thing here is dynamic. And this one might take a second. So when I say dynamic, I mean, creating change, right? So the process of writing these essays, if you do a brainstorm and you come up with your 5 topics, whatever it's going to be, and then you just tell a story about something that happened last summer, and that story stays static, right? Your memory of it stays static. It's just something in the past and it's done. Those essays are not going to help you. right? They might not necessarily hurt you, but they're not going to help you. The process of writing these essays should create change in you. You should be re-examining what you remember and what you don't remember about these experiences that you've had. You should be thinking a lot and often about why you care about a certain subject and what the program you did last summer, how it helped you move forward towards your goals and what your goals are. The process of these applications should change you. If you don't change during these applications, then your essays are not going to be as good as they could be. The stories must be change, okay? Because every story that has ever been told by anyone, anywhere, at any time, it's all the same story. There's a character, the character faces some kind of conflict, and in the process of facing conflict, the character changes. That's it. Character, conflict, and change. Every story that's ever told, everything you're ever going to write, character, conflict, and change. Now, in our case for these like personal essays, we know the characters are, you, and maybe there's a teacher or a friend or whatever, and that's fine. So when I say character, I really mean like characteristics, like personality traits. So once you have, a certain topic for an essay, and you know what the stories, or you're figuring out what the story is going to be, you have to decide, what are the characteristics of me that are relevant to this story? Because you have like probably 20 or 30 personality traits, but they aren't all relevant to the thing that you did last summer. There's really probably only going to be 2 or 3 characteristics, maybe 4. It depends. But I tell my students, you make a chart. Like you literally make this chart at the top of the Google Doc when you're writing your essays, and you sit down and you make that list. Oh, my curiosity. Oh, I had some doubts about my leadership. I had resilience in this story. You write down those lists of personality traits that are relevant to what's happening. And then we have conflict. So conflict does not have to mean like arguments and people fighting and stuff like that. It can, but don't think of it that way for writing a story. Conflict really just means a thing that has to be done. It requires some kind of work or effort. So if I tell a story about going to the fridge to get my dinner, I could have a conflict that's about my muscles and bones fighting gravity. That's a kind of conflict. That's a story. It's not an interesting story, but it is a story. There is something that needs to be done. My muscles and bones have to work together, and I have to move my feet forward and get to the fridge. There's also other conflict that's like something psychological or emotional. Maybe I remember something that my mom said one time when I was walking to the fridge and she was giving me a hard time about getting some more Twinkies or something, right? That's a psychological conflict. So any story, it has probably dozens of conflicts if you really think about it. So you have to decide, you make a list. Again, at the top of that document, you make a list of the conflicts that are necessary for the story. Usually there's one internal, like a psychological thing, emotional, whatever. I had doubts about my leadership. There's one that's going to be external. So the members of the team all spoke different languages. And then there's going to be a third one. And the third one I always call like a wild card. It might be internal, might be external. We don't really know. Just keep that one flexible, and you'll decide as you're like planning out the story and doing the writing. And then the last thing, change, character, conflict, and change. So the change always is the result of the conflicts that you have. So if you have 3 conflicts, you have to have 3 kinds of change. You have 2 conflicts, 2 kinds of change. What is the outcome? Because if there is no change in a story, then it's not a story. It's just a bunch of words. Okay. So do this process. It takes a little extra time, but it will save you hours and hours and hours on the back end where you're not like staring at the screen and wondering what you're supposed to say. You make this chart, you have a plan, you start writing the words, and you're always looking back at those 3 C's to see if your sentences actually match with the things that you have in your little chart. Okay. So once we get to writing the story, all stories, they have beats, beat like a song, right? Like a rhythm, like when you're listening to a song and you hear the drum, boom, 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 as the story moves forward or the song moves forward. So when it comes to a story, a beat has a few different kind of examples. It could be, something that happens, right? So the door slams shut If it's a story about trying to get out of a room, the door slams shut, well, that's a beat because it's something that happened and now the story has changed. It could be something internal. You know, you have a certain emotional reaction, or people and other people in the story they change the way that they're thinking and feeling. You know, you realize something, you ask a question. It kind of depends on the story, but they all have beats. Okay. So if you have a story where you go from one beat to the next, and as you're reading it, and that connection from the first beat to the second beat is and then, it's not a story. It's just a bunch of words. So what I'm really talking about is causation. So all of those like elements of your story, as they go from one to the next, you should either say therefore or however in your mind, right? Not literally on the page. We're going to talk about transition words. They're terrible. I know you're taught to use them, but they're awful. But as you're reading it, like that causation, it should be either therefore or however. That's the only way to have a story, right? So for example, these are some things I did today. I got a haircut, and then ate breakfast, and then the weather changed, and then mail arrived, and then. This is not a story. This is a list. This is a story. I just kind of made this up a few minutes ago, but I'll let you skim through it. It's not a good story, but it is a story because each of those beats that we see from here before, instead of being and then, it's a therefore or a however. I think actually all of these are, I think there's a couple howevers in here. I just did this really fast. But that's what you have to do. Now, a lot of the prompts, when we get to the prompts later, you know, there's like for example, YYGS has a 100-word prompt. You're not going to have multiple beats in a 100-word answer. But for the essays that are, you know, anything that's 200 words or more, you know, like 250, 300, 400, 500, there are a few like 600-word essays. You're going to have beats, and those beats must have causation. They cannot be just a list, because that's your resume. That's your transcript. These stories are about being a person and showing the programs who you are. What kind of kid are you? Why should they choose you over the hundreds or thousands of other kids who are trying to get into it? And again, it's not that great of a story, but it is a story. So it is more than just writing things and structuring well. In order to know what to say, you have to understand what this program is. And so more than you've ever done for anything else in your classes and all of that kind of stuff, you have to have as clear as possible understanding of what this program is. And there's a few sort of ways to do that. You have to understand the content of the program itself. So some of these programs are basically classes, you know, like you're sitting in a college classroom, there's a professor, they're giving lectures, you're taking notes, maybe they have, you know, some exercises and even kind of like tests too. And those are, you know, very like lecture based. So if that's one of those programs, you need to make sure you understand that, because if you don't understand it, you're not going to have a good way to explain why you should be taking that program. Other programs are much more hands-on, much more lab-based, like Cosmos or something, right? Where you're, you know, doing specific scientific methodologies, you're going places, you know, the Santa Cruz Bugs and Bones one, you're out on the boat and you're throwing the net and you're catching the critters in the water. It's cool, right? So you have to have an understanding of what this program, what is the content of it. Business programs, right? Like they have pitch exercises and team-based things. So be as specific as you can in understanding what you're getting into. Sometimes you can figure out the professors that are going to be like leading the program. When you do, figure out what they do, especially like for Cosmos. Most of the Cosmos clusters, they give you information about the teachers who are leading it. And oftentimes that can give you something to write about in those little 150-word essays where you have to explain why you want to be in that cluster. You do the research on what these professors have been doing. I had someone last year where they did it was something, it was like a biotech, and the professor had like created his own company like on the side, and the cluster was basically like a combination of like the lecture on the specific like biological material, like the concepts, but then also on the like process of getting that scientific knowledge out into the marketplace and packaging it to sell. I think it was like pharmaceutical or something. And the students who did that research about that professor and talked about it in the essay of like the company and what they could gain by understanding, like absorbing his mentorship, they did much better in terms of getting in than the students who said, I like biology, right? So you have to decide how much do you want this program that you're applying to, and you do the steps necessary to make the admissions officers choose you over the other ones. It's not about do you deserve it, it's proving that you are the better choice for them. And the last thing to understand is the outcome of like what you're going to do, right? So like, for example, the business thing I was talking about. If you're going to have, one of those pitch-based programs where you come up with a business idea and you do all the steps from research and design to marketing to figuring out the cost of the unit per square foot, like whatever it is that you're doing, and then you have to present it and you do the art and all of the steps. Is that something that you can use later? Is that something that you can like transition into your bigger, like outside of this program goals? So I have students that they have specific business ideas, like they've already started working on a company and a product. And so they go to these programs, like, the Wharton programs or Georgetown, B-Bay, and they use these programs to develop the product that they've already started, or at least the idea that they've already started. And so an essay that is saying, I'm going to design a new bike that fixes the design flaw of the pedals and the gears, and I know exactly what kinds of materials I need, and I already know how to do CAD and SolidWorks. And this program is going to like move me forward in 1, 2, 3 ways. That essay is massively better than an essay that someone says, I like to buy stuff. I think business is really cool. I took an economics class, and so now I want to learn about, should I go to business school, right? So it's all about like you and what you are trying to do and who you are as a person that explains why that's the thing you're trying to do. And the outcome of this program is like one of the priorities for what you should talk about in those essays, if possible. Now, when we come to the source of information, the issue is that a lot of these programs are murky, I'll say. And, sometimes it's deliberately that they don't give a ton of information because they know that if people really find out what the program is, not that many people will apply. But in general, for the good programs, for the better ones, you can be pretty confident that you're going to find a good amount of information from looking through the website. There'll be a lot of people talking about it on YouTube and other sources, right? So you will be able to find stuff. So when you are doing the research, this first bullet under source of information, I know how much teenagers now hate to see this, but read every word on the website. Do not do the thing where you just skim and you see 3 words, you're like, oh, there was nothing there. Basically what I do all day long is watch people share screen, watch them write, and watch them like do research on the internet. So I know how teenagers use the internet now. If you want to get into these high-level competitive programs, you have to learn as much as you can. Read every page. Because, for example, YYGS, they have it's 100 or 150 words, maybe 200, where they ask, why are you a good fit with our program? And how can you explain how you're a good fit with the program if you don't understand the program, right? You have to understand like the culture of the program, maybe even like the history of the program. Maybe if it's like a new program and you can figure out why the university created this new branch as opposed to the stuff they already have, right? Anything that you can find that will help you explain a personal connection to how you want to use the program, how you fit with it, what is the culture, what are your values, what are their values. You need all of that stuff, okay? And that means reading every word of every page of their website. Even if you think it's not going to be useful, I promise you it will. Now, when it comes to social media, one thing I do want to say, and this applies also to the college applications, you'll find, hundreds or thousands of examples of other essays and, things that people have written where they're certain that that's what got them into the program. And you have to be careful with that. So I never tell people don't look online for examples. You definitely should, right? Both for kind of like ideas and context, and to get you comfortable with what you're supposed to be doing. But also, you can't invest your approach based on what you see. Because one thing is that these students who got in, they don't know if they got in because of their essay or in spite of their essay. And so of course they're going to say it's because, right? Because they're really excited. They got in the YYGS, and so they're really proud of it. So they're going to make a video on YouTube that brags about how awesome their essays were, because that's the only thing they can really like brag about. They're not going to brag about their GPA or what their resume looks like. They're naturally going to assume that, oh my God, I must have written the most amazing essays ever. And maybe their essays are okay, but it easily could be that that's not what got them in. It was other things that got them in. Or even more importantly, is that an essay that works for one student is not necessarily going to work for you. I would say that most of the time it's not going to, right? So look online for examples and advice. Totally do that, right? It'll help you in the process, but just do it with a grain of salt. Remind yourself that this is what worked for them, maybe, and it's not necessarily going to work for you, okay? So do that research, but be smart about it. Now, just to give you kind of like an example, we're going to get into some examples now. I pulled up here the UCSB, the Summer Research Academy. And I like this one, or at least I chose this one for tonight, because it's a really good program. It's competitive, but it's not like, it's not like YYGS or Cosmos, right? And it covers, a wide range of like topics for people for all different kinds of majors. Okay. So I would recommend it to be kind of one of your starting points as long as you're, going to be 16 by next summer. So they have a lot of information on their website. You choose some of the tracks, up to 2, and then you explain why those are the tracks that you're using. And so as you see, there's 12 options. And remember, we talked about being strategic. And so on the one hand, you see one that you like, yeah, sure, cool. Go with your gut instinct as one possible candidate. But then also, be smart about it. Think about it more big picture of what is your brand, and which of these sessions, I think they call it, the tracks, which of these tracks fit what you look like to UCSB admissions officers? Because it might be that you really do want to learn about, neuroscience and how it fits with CS. Like that's really something that you care about and like you're excited to try to like get into. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best strategic choice given what your classes that you've taken and what your resume looks like. So the first priority is to get in, right? And then, we figure out like the best options once you do get in of like, how is this going to fit into what you're trying to do for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years and beyond. So start with Santa Barbara. Notice here that the application deadline is a little kind of funky, right? This is basically like a mini rolling situation where, the deadline is March 31st, but they start evaluating the applications in January. So is it possible that if you submit on March 5th, there'll still be spots for you? Yeah, it's possible, but also maybe not. Right. And so this is part of like the research that you have to do. is to understand each of these programs and what is necessary for you to maximize your chances of getting in. We can't control what happens. We're just trying to increase the probability. Now, one way to increase the probability, maybe the most important way, is to get into this mindset that every word matters. And, I know that it's, when you go on social media, when you're talking with your friends, everything you see is this like contest of like who can exaggerate in the coolest way possible, right? But for these essays, you have to get out of that mindset. You have to get into the mindset of every single word is necessary. And if there are words that are not necessary, then they shouldn't be in the essay. So again, I'll go back to the example of YYGS. They have several prompts that are either 100 words or 280 characters. 280 characters is basically 2 sentences, right? And the more exclusive programs, like the more competitive, hard to get into programs, they tend to have shorter and shorter prompts because it's more difficult to say something important in a smaller space. So when you see a 100-word prompt, that does not mean like, oh, great, I can just make up whatever in 3 sentences and I'm done. No, when they have 100 words, it's because the standards are higher, not lower. And so every single word matters. And so the way to get the most information into a small space in English is all about the verbs. Okay. So it's a whole long story. And if any of you ever take human geography with me, or even AP World, I have like a whole little lecture about it. But it goes back to the Romans and when they designed Latin, basically, right? And the Romans had this very special problem where they had to conquer and control people in an area that had an ocean or the Mediterranean in the middle of it. So a giant ocean in the middle of their empire, and every single group of people that they're trying to control for hundreds of years, they're from wildly different language backgrounds, different alphabets, different grammar systems, right? Their whole style of communicating is completely different, So like 2 different computer programs that literally cannot operate together. And so the Romans, their solution was to conjugate verbs. And it's the most important thing that we get in English from Latin is the conjugating of the verbs. So every sentence that you are ever going to write for the rest of your life, the most important word in that sentence is the verb. Every single one, I promise you. And so those of you who, aren't necessarily confident in your writing, you focus on the verbs. When you do your drafts, you just, get stuff onto the page. You just say a bunch of things. That's fine, right? But then you go back and you focus on the verbs, 1 sentence at a time. Is this the necessary verb? Is this the best verb? Are there things that are extra that I can get rid of? And so I'll start with this example. Allowed me to, able to, enable me to, and decided to. These are phrases that I don't ban them necessarily, but they're very, very close to being banned. And part of it is because of the fact that they're just used so much. I know that as you're looking at this list of words and you're cringing because probably half of your sentences say allow me to, able to, enabled me to, or decided to. You have to try to get away from that. Focus on the verb that matters. So when you have a sentence that says, it allowed me to explore deeper into this topic. So you ask yourself, what matters more, being allowed to explore deeper or exploring deeper? And I'm telling you that 19 times out of 20, it's the second verb, not the allowed, right? The enabled me to move up to calculus BC. Is it the enabled or is it the moving up that matters? It's almost always the moving up. So for decided to, basically the only time to say decided to is if the point of your story is that you have different options and you're trying to figure out the pros and the cons and which is better and what's the long-term consequence and what happens if I do this other choice and, oh my God, I don't know what to do. Okay, I decided to choose this thing. If that's the case, sure. but any other time decided to doesn't matter. It's wasting space and it's wasting time for the admissions officers because they are exhausted, they're bored, they're tired of reading these essays. Give them the best version. Use the best verbs, active verbs, specific verbs, right? Like explore, right? Now, a little box just for fun. I actually have like a whole long list, like multiple pages, or like 2 pages of words and phrases that I don't let students use. And I know that in the box, those phrases are words that you oftentimes use. Participate, just for example, it comes back to the verb, right? When you have a sentence that says, I participated in the thing, inevitably, you have to then go on to explain what you did after participating. So why not just go straight to that second verb? Because if you tell us that you recruited new members, well, then we know you participated because you're doing the recruiting. So participate is, I mean, honestly, it's more than 19 out of 20. It's 99 times out of 100. It's redundant. Okay. These other phrases, I have always, ever since, growing up. I know it's like very tempting and you do it all the time. But if you do it all the time, everyone else does it all the time. And now you just sound like everyone else. And you've shot yourself in the foot when you're trying to like show how different and special you are. So avoid these phrases. And lastly, the transitions. Every English teacher in this country should be fired. It drives me crazy. You've been taught to, at the beginning of a paragraph, just slap a however on there, or therefore, or whatever. And don't do it. You get out of this habit of using these transition phrases. Because if you're writing, like a 10-page paper or, something technical for like an engineering journal and it's like your PhD dissertation or something, well, then yeah, sure. You're going to use transitions because you're trying to make it easy for the people to read these long, dry, boring documents. But in a 300-word essay, that's personal. It's about your experiences, your thoughts, your feelings, the things that you've done. You shouldn't have any howevers or therefores. If you organize your story logically, that is the transition, right? The logic of a good story is automatically transitioning from there was a problem, I did some things to deal with the problem, I changed, I learned these things, and now I'm going to do whatever in the future, right? You don't need those transitions. Force yourself to break that habit. You're addicted to them. And, the sooner you can do that, and this is true in general for all of these summer applications, and it comes back to that dynamic thing that I was talking about. These applications are a practice run for your college essays. So yeah, it'll kind of like hurt a little bit in the short term to force yourself to like break your addiction to however. But if you do that and you get good at focusing on the right verbs, if you get good at eliminating redundancy, if you do these sort of basic preliminary steps that we've been talking about tonight, you do that now, I promise you, your college essays will be better. They'll be faster. You'll enjoy it more, and you'll get better results in terms of the colleges that you get into. And it will still pay off for these summer applications too. It is going to benefit you. So there's a short-term benefit and the bigger long-term benefit. This is a practice run for your colleges. And so I actually, just something I wanted to mention is, when you're doing your research and you have, your list of programs you're going to apply to, I always tell people, apply to a couple of the really hard ones, the ones that you're not going to get into. It's the benefit that you get from it, as long as you have time to do it, the benefit that you're going to get from it when you're actually doing your college applications later is easily worth it, right? Both in terms of like the steps that you're taking and just sort of understanding like how to compete, when it's like a 4% acceptance rate. And also, kind of have that like that first heartbreak kind of a thing where, you don't get in, you have to like kind of confront the pain of that rejection, right? It will make you stronger. It will make you smarter for those college applications. So as long as you have like time to do a couple of these, you know, like a YYGS or like B-Bay or something where it's like 60 people, you should do it. Just one or two. You know, we don't want to like overwhelm you and like take away from your other applications and your schoolwork and stuff. But I personally promise you that it is worth going through this sort of like the steps and dealing with the disappointment of not getting in. And then maybe you get in also, right? Let's not forget that. So you never know. So do that. Things not to do. And actually, hold on, I need some water. I'm talking too fast. This first one goes back to the academic writing thing. I know that you've been trained to start your answer by repeating the prompt. So why do you want to choose cluster 4? And then your first sentence, I want to choose cluster 4 because. For your classes, history classes, English classes, whatever, that absolutely makes sense. Totally, right? Teachers, they have a lot of grading to do. And you know, you need to practice this sort of like format. That's fine. But for these essays, never repeat the prompt. This is a completely different style of writing. So don't write in that academic tone. Using big vocabulary does not impress anyone anymore, because literally any kid from anywhere in the world can just pull up ChatGPT and have it write some cool, fancy list of words that, you know, say big important things or whatever. You don't need fancy words to have an impact on the reader. And, you know, this is, I don't see a lot of people talking about this yet online. It's kind of, I don't know, kind of crazy to me, but now that we're in the ChatGPT era, it's just, it is not possible that admissions officers don't appreciate reading essays that they know is just, you know, John and Linda and Susan writing sentences about how they feel and telling stories about who they are. You don't need fancy words to say important things. And, you know, it's one of the top priorities for, especially for my college application kids. As long as you care and as long as you are, you know, thinking about important things. Now, there are times to use, you know, fancy vocabulary, especially when you're talking about, you know, if you have like research experience or some internship or whatever, where you're trying to show off like your, you know, like how much you understand about a certain subject. Yeah, then that's appropriate. But doing it for the sake of trying to show like how smart you are is counterproductive. That actually hurts you. Okay. Another thing that will hurt you is getting stuck on this idea of, okay, well, what do they want? Let me give them what they want. And you're not, most of you are going to like this answer, but I promise you that what they want is to learn about you. Okay. They want to find out who you are. So answer the prompt, right? If they're asking you about, you know, why you're interested in a subject, don't tell them a story about, you know, going to the lake and going fishing, unless that trip to the lake to go fishing is related to why you like a certain subject. Okay. So you do answer the prompt, but other than that, do not get stuck trying to give them what they want. They want you. They want to learn about you. And so another thing I see even still for the college kids, or the college application kids, is trying to, you know, those phrases where it's like, you know, I would love to have the opportunity to learn from the YYGS's world-class professors. Flattering the programs doesn't help. They know that they're great. And you telling them that they're great doesn't help your story. Now, you figure out what they're great at, and you figure out what is your personal connection to whatever great thing that they're doing, and you explain why you care about it and how the two of you together will do something awesome. That's a good story. But just flattering them for the sake of it because you think that they will like it if you tell them that they're great, that's not going to do anything for you. It's wasting space, and it actually kind of, rubs them the wrong way. Think about it when someone tells you, like someone has a crush on you and they're like, oh my God, you're amazing. It doesn't make you like them more, right? Kind of makes you like, ugh. So focus on yourself. Who are you? What do you care about? What do you want to do? How does this program help you do what you want to do? And I know I've been talking a lot about things not to do and, not doing the wrong things. Ultimately, always, the last thing you remind yourself before you sit down to write some stuff, and while you're thinking about essays, and when you think about like planning a time to sit down and do some of the essay work, they want to like you. This is not a like punitive thing where they're looking for flaws and trying to eliminate you. It's not. It's the opposite. Yes, they have a ton of kids and they have to say no to a ton of people. Yes. But they want to like you. Every time the admissions officer picks up your essay and starts to read, they're looking for reasons to like you. So just remember that. The huge majority of you are pretty awesome. So give them those things about you that are awesome. We pick those things. We are thoughtful about which ones we want to present and the way we phrase it and the way we put together these stories. But always, always remember that they want to like you. This is a positive, proactive process. It is not like a punitive thing where they're deducting points like in the Olympics or something. Okay. So now some examples. This is by no means a complete list. I mean, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of kinds of prompts, but in general, they tend to fall into these kinds of categories. And the first one is, a general sort of like personal statement of interest. It's a pretty good parallel for the kind of essay that you do for the Common App when you're doing your college applications. It tends to be a little bit longer and a little, more of like a vague general prompt, or where they give you like several pieces of information that you have to like include that kind of covers everything, right? So it's like a comprehensive type of a prompt. Usually 300, 400, 500 words long. And that really is like a story, right? Like a straight up narrative with different twists and turns, and we get to learn like how you think and how you feel about stuff. Other kinds of prompts, the why this program, those are usually shorter, right? So Cosmos has, you can choose up to 2 different clusters for Cosmos, and those 2 essays are 150 words. And this comes back to the strategic thing. So for Cosmos, you have your 300-word statement of interest, your personal statement, this sort of general thing. And then if you choose 2 clusters, 250-word essays that are focused on like specifically that cluster, like the topic and why you're interested in it and what you're going to do with it. So those 3 essays, they should work together, right? The personal statement should be personal. It should show us, that like that human journey that you're on. Can it talk about your academic interests? Yeah, sure. Like that can be part of the scenery and part of the color of the story. It can be the motivation or whatever, right? Meanwhile, those 2 cluster essays, they're shorter. They're much more like practical. It's much more about like giving them specific information, showing them that vision that you have, explaining clearly what you want to do, right? It's functional. The personal statement is more of a story. The cluster essays are pragmatic, okay? Pretty good number of programs will have something about like, whether it's a disagreement or YYGS has the one where it's tell us about a time that you challenged a belief or idea, right? So some kind of, personal challenge. And the tendency, being teenagers, and actually this is just human nature, when we have these sort of personal challenge essays, we want a trauma dump, right? So I always tell my students, yeah, do the trauma dump. That first draft, get all of that, darkness and pain or whatever, get that on the page, right? Get it out of your system. Because we do need some of it. Because we do have to have a conflict of some kind. We do have to see you go on some kind of, intellectual or emotional journey, right? So get it on the page, but then we're only going to use parts of it. So instead of having an essay that's 90% problem and then 10% at the end, like literally 2-3 sentences, I see it all the time, where it just ends with suddenly or eventually, I figured it out and then now everything's better, right? I call it the 90% problem. So that essay, nobody likes. The trauma dump is no good. But an essay that's 30% problem, 40% the actions that you took to overcome the problem, and then 30% reflecting on what you learned and how you grew and what this means for your future, that's an essay. So we do still need conflict. We do still need 30% of problem, but definitely not 90%. It's not a trauma dump. It's a piece of conflict that fits into this narrative of character, conflict, and change. Okay. And then you're going to have almost, not all programs, but a pretty good number of programs are going to ask you something just straight up personal, hobbies, interests, this goes back to the diversity versus, variety versus like specificity, specialization. So have your essays that handle your specialization, and then have a few ideas of just fun stuff. You go fishing with your grandpa sometimes, little things. You like to do the New York Times crossword puzzle every day with your mom, whatever. Those little things that are just pure personality, just being a kid, definitely is important material, and you will have prompts for that. So we have, a big wide mix. So here's what the prompts are for SRA. 500-word personal statement, okay? And notice that this personal statement includes like specifics about the track that you would choose, right? So that's different from Cosmos. The Cosmos personal statement is just, much more general, and then you have the separate essays that are about those specific clusters, which is the parallel of the track for SRA. And then this one also wants that unique special thing. Okay, so this personal statement is more of like a medley. It's like a 3-part question. Okay, and then you still have 150 words, 3 other essays that should fit your personal statement, right? Like we should be read as like, oh yeah, like this is the same kid and it makes sense, right? It all fits into that brand that you have. But also, you don't want to be redundant. You don't want to just repeat a bunch of the same ideas and the same feelings, the same experiences, right? So if you had some big, like important internship, can it be mentioned twice in 4 essays? Yeah, sure, right? But if it's going to be, if it's going to be mentioned more than once, it has to be in different ways. Okay, you do not repeat yourself. Actually, these prompts are different from last year. The third one last year was something else. It was like create a hashtag, I think it was. So now this one is much more just directly like your academic and personal goals. And that's easily something that you could cover in the 500, right? So you have to figure out, where do these pieces fit together? It's a holistic whole. Are we showing your brand? How do these essays all work in unison? What are the stories? And so here, actually, this is an example of the Cosmos essay. So I'll let you look through it a little bit. And I'm going to show you 2 examples real quick. This one is going to be a little more critical. And I don't mean to like show this one because it's like some horrible example, right? But there are some things that I want you to see, like in the wild and see how it like plays out. So I'll give you a minute to read through this. So the first thing, I highlighted a couple of spots there in red, and those are those sorts of, sort of the warning phrases that we want to try to avoid, right? So, it captivates me isn't automatically a bad word, but it is going to set you up to kind of leave you in a stuck position. If you look at that sentence, now as soon as they say captivates me, now they're kind of stuck, like saying a pretty, generic thing after that, right? And in this case, I mean, it is, it's a nice thing that they're saying, right? Like they understand what they're trying to express, but it's a limiting sentence. It doesn't really give us much information about like how they're going to use this cluster to move their goals forward, right? My interest, that word interest, interesting, interested, my interests. Interest is the most boring word in the English language because it doesn't tell us anything. Interesting, significant, right? All it does is it tells us, significant tells us that it's important, but it doesn't tell us anything about why it's important or how it's important. And then you end up having to say something else later to try to express that. So why are you even wasting time saying significant? Or interest me here. So it piques my interest. Okay, cool. And it's good that you're eager, but you are applying to Cosmos. We already know that you're eager. So the eagerness itself isn't really enough. And the fact that you're interested in something doesn't add anything. It's just repeating the fact that you're eager. Okay. So these are words that are wasting space and aren't really adding anything important. In the blue, I've highlighted, as you can see, maybe you noticed it as you're reading, this student has like a couple little sort of crutches that they rely on over and over. And everyone does. I mean, if I look back at my writing, there's definitely things that I do over and over again. And that's inevitable. But to do, as it was 4 times in 150 words, that just reflects a lack of like, paying attention, right? Because Cosmos is very hard to get into. They know that you're spending hours and hours on this stuff. So you have to be self-aware about, kind of your tendencies as a writer and try to eliminate these things that kind of reflect poorly on, your level of interest. This student is telling them how eager he is to get into Cosmos, but he's not eager enough to notice that he says as it over and over again, right? So it's kind of like contradicting himself. And then also he has the not only, but also. He does that twice in 150 words. And he also does this is a really common one, where is it? Yeah, so from to. I think, it's fair to say that probably every student I have for the college applications will do a from to in at least one of their essays. So I'm not saying to like not do it, but he also did it in his other cluster essay. He did it in his personal statement essay. And, just like with as it and not only, but also, it just reflects a lack of taking the time to write in a, like a fresh, engaging, and more creative kind of way. Okay. Now here at the end, I actually like the ending. It does a good job of expressing what their goals are as a result of this particular cluster, right? So I'm not at all saying that this essay is like, a mess and like terrible. It has its good parts, but it has things that, we could have fixed. And, we edited this a bunch, but this student fell into the trap of kind of, too much homework and kept pushing it back, and Cosmos is due in mid-February. And he ended up, like doing his final drafts after we had our last meeting. And, he had to submit that night, and I never had a chance to look at it again. And, the lack of planning, the lack of like getting ahead of these things in November and December, right? So now we have another example. And this one I do think is, I guess better. This student got in. And so I'll give you a couple minutes to look at it. And here and I apologize if there are any colorblind people in the audience, but I have green and then I have red. So the green highlights are things, that I believe were done well. And there's a lot of green here. And so for me, this first sentence, good example, 150 words, it's short, right? So most people will have a sentence that says, this cluster will strengthen my skills in math. And it's a true thing, but is it going to make you stand out? Is it specific? Does it show any kind of personality at all? No. Okay. I think that, this particular opening is, more specific and leads into some of the other ideas that he talks about later in a better way, right? And remember that this is not the 150 words for the Cosmos cluster. It's not the kind of essay where you're trying to have like a clever hook. Now, is it possible? Yeah, sure, right? I mean, I have had students where just from the way things align and taking the time to research ahead of time and understanding the topic and, learning more about the topic as part of this application, and we figured out some cool, clever little like 8-word hook to start it out. Yeah, sure, it does happen. But in general, that's not the point of the Cosmos cluster essays. You're conveying information as, like briskly and energetically as you can. And so we do have a little bit of a story. Oops, sorry. We do get into like a little bit of like an actual story, right? Before we get there, I do want to point out here, he has, I'm excited to. And, that's on that list of things to try to avoid saying. And here, it's okay, right? Like it doesn't ruin the essay. I think the second sentence is a little kind of clunky in how it like fits with the first sentence, but that's fine, right? They don't expect you to be a professional writer. And I actually would argue that having your essays be like so perfect is counterproductive, because again, it makes them start to be suspicious about having, ChatGPT do everything for you. So they don't expect you to be, a grandmaster of literature. Like you can have some clunky sentences and some imperfect grammar and stuff like that. That's actually ideal, right? So here, this second sentence doesn't bother me at all. We're moving forward. We're going somewhere important. And then I think what the main thing that saves it for me is that the first sentence of the second paragraph gets personal. It tells us a real thing, right? So, this specific place, so it shows that the student has some like experience and actual, advanced knowledge of the field. And it gives us an idea, right? Something where inside their head, syncretism, it just means, it's a word that means like a mixture, like a hybrid combination of things or ideas. And so we get this little glimpse, 150-word essay, we get this little glimpse into how this kid thinks and some kind of change that happened, right? This would be a beat. We have the fascination, right? And the other essay, the captivated, kind of hurt. In this case, it's used better, right? So remember, no words are like banned, but certain words, if you're going to use them, you have to, be smart about how you use them, because the fascination did something, right? It sparked a need. So that fascination takes us inside their mind and we learn something about who they are as a person. If you have a sentence that says, this topic fascinates me, so what? We know that because you're choosing the cluster, right? And then we have, some relatively, like high level scientific concepts. So that's fine, right? Because it's done in a way that isn't just trying to like show off. It's like the students actually engaging with these ideas and why they're important to him. And then the last sentence, or the little, conclusion paragraph, I want to point out, because this is pretty casual language, but I'm completely okay with that. You're supposed to be a person. You aren't writing academic anymore. You can say important things with normal words. It's better that way now. Okay. So now let's look at the Cosmos prompt for personal statement. And I highlighted these two parts because these are the two parts that actually matter. They want to know who you are. They want to know who you are different from all the other people who are applying. It's not a contest of resumes or GPA. It is a story that reveals important things about you, right? So hopefully that's not too small. Let me see if I can get a little more room here. So really, at least focus on that first, the intro, the first, I guess, 3 paragraphs. Smart kid, experienced kid, high level math and all that stuff, but it's still a personal story. We're still learning about him and why he cares so much about math and physics. And it's real. This is his actual life. So it is a human story, not just one of those template things that you copy from some website somewhere or get from ChatGPT. And in the middle, he does kind of get into a little bit of a list of his resume, right? Which is okay. But notice that it isn't just, I did art of problem solving, I did AMC, I qualify for AME. It's not just a list. It's a causation, right? Art of problem solving caused the AMC competition performance, which caused AME qualification, right? It's not just and then. Cause and effect. That's a story. And then we have the ending. Another little sort of tip that this applies for all of these applications for these programs and for college applications. By the end of your essays, you should be in present tense. You should be talking about yourself and whatever experience that you had in the past, how it's created who you are now or influenced who you are now. And then you have a few sentences of now in the present tense. And then you end with 1 or 2 sentences about future, right? Now, you don't want to make it formulaic, it's just all of your essays are repeating that same thing. But in general, that's one of those little tips. Remember, your stories have to be dynamic. If all of your stories are just fully contained in the past, I went to this place, I read some stuff, I learned a few things, and now I want to major in it. That's not the story that's going to help you. You have to change in the process of writing these essays. Okay. When I started meeting with this student last year to write these essays, all of this stuff in the last paragraph, he didn't know that yet. It was there. It was, buried down in his thoughts and his experiences, but we took the time and we pulled it out. He sat and he thought over and over again, different days. He made a little time on Saturdays and after his different practices on Tuesday or whatever, right? He made it a dynamic process where he learned about himself by writing these stories. And that's how you get your best ones. And that is the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you for Mr. Sebastian for their outstanding and insightful presentation so far, and much appreciate. And yeah, so now come to my round. So yeah, 其实呢，不光今天呢，我们所讨论的暑期孩子的规划，那抓住冬季呢与春季的黄金时机呢，也是在为孩子的未来道路上提升学术的竞争力。那首先呢，下一页，谢谢。那我们的 P2P 呢，是与湖南大学官方合作，携手国内权威的媒体和电台，全程报道了项目进展，为学生提供真实的社会实践和宝贵的金融经验。在项目中呢，学生呢将通过实际的案例深入学习微金融，帮助农村农民实现经济独立，同时培养关键商业的分析技能，为未来的金融经济学奠定基础。此外呢，学生还有机会在电台采访中展现自己的努力成果，为申请顶尖大学增加强有力的公共服务和实践经验。下一页，谢谢。那加入哥斯达黎加这个冬季实习项目呢，体验亲手保护生物多样性的环保行动，深入当地社区，提升同学们的西班牙语的沟通技能。这个独特的经历不仅让你获得跨文化交流的宝贵体验，更能为顶尖大学申请增添亮点。如果感兴趣的家长们呢，也可以联系我们各中心老师。下一页，谢谢。 OK，这个是我们最新开设的课程。那首先呢，我先讲一下 Digital SAT 的备考课程。我们的课程呢是由 SAT 专家团队打造，专注提升数学批判性阅读和写作能力。通过数字化的考试模拟、互动课堂、小班教学以及定期的追踪，我们能够帮助学生精准地掌握考试重点，快速提高他们的应试能力。此外呢，我们还提供了丰富的练习资源和个性化的辅导，确保每位学生能最大化的提升成绩，为我们25年的 SAT 考试做好万全的准备。还有呢，就是非常有意思的一个项目，叫 AI in Action Real World in Projects。这个项目呢，学生呢将在 Microsoft 高级数据与应用科学家的指导下，通过我们的真实案例学习，并开发独一无二的 AI 项目。我们的导师呢是拥有丰富的机器学习项目开发和 AI 模型优化的经验的，并在 NLP 自然语言处理领域拥有多项专利。那还有呢，我们的 Amy Prep， 我们的课程呢是由顶尖的数学家亲自授课，帮助学生掌握 Amy 核心的知识点与解答技巧，快速提升我们的竞赛能力。无论是冲击高分呢，还是为未来的名校申请，都是增加不少的亮点。那我们也有强大的阵容主导讲师，他是北大的数学教授本科，加州大学尔湾分校的博士，还有呢荣获麻省理工学院的博士，荣获07年俄罗斯数学奥林匹克金牌、国际数学奥林匹克的金牌。在下面呢是我们的 Free。加入这项大学级别的研究项目呢，深入探索 STEM、商科、人文科学等多个领域，覆盖了人工智能、数据分析、心理学、计算机科学等热门课程。项目呢还提供发表机会，有望在科研杂志上展示自己的研究成果，并且有机会能拿到高达$10,000的大奖。但今年冬天的报名已经截止了，那明年夏天的名额我们还在火热的进行当中。下一页，谢谢。接下来呢，我们飞达的东岸名校深度游之旅，我们可以亲身体验哈佛、耶鲁、MIT 布朗，还有哥大等顶尖大学的校园生活。我们可以全方位的了解东海岸的教育资源，获得飞达专家的升学指导，与招生官面对面的交流，明确大学目标，提升申请竞争力。我们有4个非常灵活的时间段，以满足家庭的不同需求。好，谢谢。下一页。下一个就是我们的竞赛 Prep。首先呢，我们 AMC 8考试的考场也是在持续的报名当中。如果有感兴趣的家庭们呢，也可以扫码进行报名，也可以咨询各当地中心的老师，他们会为你们去解答。OK， 下一页，谢谢。其实呢，我们有非常有趣的一个部分呢，就是在飞达教育呢，我们的学生不仅专注于学术，更积极地发起并参与各类社团的活动，通过实践不断提升自我的综合能力，从组织管理的团队合作，从创意表达到实际执行落地。他们在社团中锻炼了领导力，解决了问题的能力，以及对社会责任和深刻的理解。那这些社团的活动不仅让学生变得更加自信和独立，为了他们的未来成长奠定了坚实的基础。那接下来呢，我们一起了解他们是如何通过这些社团去实现自我提升的。首先呢，我想先介绍一下我们理工类的社团。下一页，谢谢。那就是我们 Ivy Max 的 Business Club。其实呢，不管你有没有基础，只要你对商业感兴趣呢，这里都是欢迎你的。中心 available 的中心也是在 Cupertino、Pleasanton 跟 San Diego。如果大家感兴趣的话，可以联系各中心的老师。那下一页呢，就是我们的 Girls in the STEP Club。其实点燃你的是这个社团是非常有意思的，是由湾区的高中女生去创立的。这里呢是专注于支持女性在 STEM 领域的发展，推动性别平等。在这里，你可以去阅读一些成功企业家的成功的故事与案例，来汲取灵感。也可以参加黑客马拉松锻炼技能，在社交平台结交新的朋友。可以扫描屏幕下方的二维码，也可以访问网站即可报名，也可以咨询我们中心的老师。那下一个呢，就是 SNAP 社区支持社团助力公益，通过 Second 与 Second Harvest 的合作，帮助 SNAP 的项目受助人同时学习实用的数据分析技能，例如 Excel 还有 Python， 并深入研究社会问题，既能为社区的贡献力量，又能提升自己的专业能力。下一页，谢谢。那下一个社团呢，也是我们一直在很火的一个火箭队，一起来探索一下科学的魅力。同学们呢，可以通过此社团呢去学习火箭的历史与原理，了解航天的技术和奥秘， 其实呢，可以运用数学和物理知识，与团队的合作设计并打造属于你自己的火箭模型。直到最后的成果展示阶段呢，我们到火箭的发射与参加竞赛的阶段，都是一个体验真实的科学挑战。这是给我们学生一个不断的一个了解火箭制作的一个过程。这个下一篇呢，其实展示的就是我们在 Fremont 中心拍摄的一些花絮，学生们热情参与讨论去制作模型的一个过程，一个 workshop。对，下一个呢就是关于一些 education 和 academic growth 教育学术成长类型的社团。首先呢，那个 Future for Kenya 是此社团呢是通过纪录片展示肯尼亚的社会和文化，为当地学生提供在线教育支持。其实我们可以帮助他们提升学习能力，还能通过捐赠物资改善社区生活的条件。项目汇集了全球募捐的志愿者的力量，培养学生的全球视野和社会的责任感。我们全程是由导师指导，确保项目长期有效。如果你也想支持他人，同时成长自己，也欢迎请加入，也可以联系当地的老师，如果对此社团感兴趣。下一页，谢谢。下一页就是我们的关于艺术跟人文方面的一个社团。首先呢，是音乐的公益社团。其实呢，这个社团呢不需要你有任何的音乐基础，其实人人都可以去参与。那我们会为小朋友上音乐课，组织趣味活动，举办慈善演出，还会捐赠乐器。其实在这里呢，我们可以学到新的技能，结识新的朋友，还有机会登台表演。所以快来加入我们吧。再下一个呢是我们的艺术社团。这个呢是我们每周六的晚上6点到8点都会有艺术的入门课。其实不论你有没有基础，只要你对艺术感兴趣的小伙伴们，我们都欢迎来参加。这里是一个包容的环境，可以让你随意的发挥创意，尽情表达自己，一起在艺术世界中去探索这个世界。这个也是在线下的 Cupertino 中心去一个运营的一个社团。那最后呢，就是我们的 Fentanyl Awareness 创造更美好的未来。此社团呢，致力于向社区普及芬太尼的危害，提高安全意识，传播 Say No to Fentanyl 的重要信息。活动在 Ivy Max Cupertino 也是线下成功的举办，也欢迎本地的学生积极参与，共同营造一个更安全的社区。扫码即可轻松参与，让我们为社会推动贡献一份力量。讲座完了之后呢，还有一些就是我们的书籍，也希望大家可以去购买。也会帮助我们的名校申请，还有一些 IC 都会有一些很大的帮助。欢迎大家可以多多关注我们的飞达微信公众号，还有我们的小红书账号，还有 Instagram。好，这是我们各中心的联系方式，也欢迎大家可以扫描2维码进群。之后呢，今天因为这个时间的原因，我们那个 Q&A 可能就不再进行了，因为我们已经记录所有家长的问题了。我们也会一一反馈给我们这个中心老师，之后会有专业的人去为大家去解答每个人的不同的问题。之后呢，我想问一下大家还有没有什么补充的？就是各位老师有没有想？如果没有的话，那就谢谢大家今天能够参加我们的讲座，非常支持我们的活动。我们不仅帮家长更好的理解如何规划孩子的暑期成长路径，还与斯坦福学子的真实案例结合，为大家提供了一个实用的指导和策略。无论是课外活动的选择呢，申请文书的书写，还是暑期项目的规划，这些内容都是紧扣主题的。我们希望为家长和学生呢未来规划注入更多的信心和方向感。所以，请大家敬请期待我们下期的活动。非常感谢，祝大家周末愉快，晚安。